where we seek to discern the truth. In late October, the Israeli Minister of Defense designated 6 eminent Palestinian human rights and civil society groups as terrorists. Today, we're honored to host Sahar Francis, director of Damir, and Ubai, Aboudi, director of the Bisan Center, and he will say the rest of the name of his center, directors of 2 of the accused groups. They will explain the work of their organizations and how these designations have impacted their staff and the work they do and the lives of the Palestinians living under Israeli military occupation. We'll also note how the US is implicated in this and offer suggestions of actions that people can take, which includes a petition from residents of Massachusetts, organizations in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts-based chapters of national organizations. A link to this petition that is to President Biden and Secretary Blinken is in the chat. If during the course of the webinar you have questions, please type them in the chat and we will have a chance for a Q&A later in the program. All right, so before we get into the details, I'd like to check in with Sahar and Ubai. Would you each like to tell us how you're doing right now? Sahar, would you like to start off?
Good evening or good morning, and thanks a lot for this opportunity. It's great to be with you today. I'm fine so far. We are still facing this horrific situation.
Thanks. Ubai?
Well, physically I'm fine. We are still coping with this situation. It's been a big impact on us, on our families, and hopefully we see better days for all human beings.
Inshallah. Okay. I'm going to ask Ubai and Sahar to respond to the following questions, and you can answer them separately or you can enter into a conversation as you wish. The next part of the webinar is about the Israeli government's before that, I'd like each of you to please tell us a little bit about who you are, why you got into this work, and then about the work that your organization does. Sahar, would you like to tell us a little bit about you and your work and Damir and the work Damir does?
Yeah. So I'm Sahar Francis, the current director of Damir Prisoner Support and Human Rights Association based in Ramallah city in the occupied territories. I'm originally from 48 areas. I'm a lawyer in practice. I joined Damir as a lawyer back in 1996 as a volunteer lawyer. And then because I used to work in Society of St. Eve in Jerusalem and Bethlehem in human rights issues, but not specifically prisoners. And then at that year, some of my colleagues started to be imprisoned and detained, and my friends, especially in Bethlehem area, by the Israeli occupation. And this is how I came involved and interested in the prisoners' issues and learned about the Damir organization, and I joined them and started to work for Damir full-time at 98 actually. In 2006, I replaced the director at that time because she was elected to the parliament and I became the parliament. I think since I started law in Haifa University, I was so interested in the human rights, especially in the occupied territories, with all the question about war crimes, crimes against humanity, and the accountability question. Because in the middle, sorry, Ubai?
No, nothing, sorry.
because in the middle of my work was the International Criminal Court established in the 90s, in the late 90s. So this is what brought me to be more and more involved in the human rights field in the occupied territories. So Damir was a Palestinian organization that was founded back in the years of the first Intifada in order to offer free legal aid for the Palestinian prisoners under the Israeli occupation. At that time in 91, late 91, 92, there were no much Palestinian civil society organizations that supported the Palestinian detainees and prisoners in the Israeli occupation military court system and the prisons. And since then, Damir developed to include as well visitation program to monitor and document all the violations, especially the torture and the isolation and other violations that the prisoners face. And of course, the advocacy and the networking, especially the advocacy on the UN level and the international level. And of course, the raising awareness for the local community for those that they could be subjected for imprisonment. And this is what the main programs that the Damir is following today.
Can you give us, before Ubai speaks, can you give us just an example perhaps of some of the information that Ademir documents and reports? Just so people had to have some, thank you.
Yes, so all these years, the torture was actually the main focus of the organization. Torture, of course, that is used under interrogation. So you can find in our website lots of information about individual stories, about techniques and strategies, and how the Israelis actually are using torture in order to oppress and maintain the oppression against the Palestinian whole society, not just the prisoners, and all kind of different violations that the prisoners systematically face under detention, health conditions, daily life conditions of the prisoners, solitary confinement, collective punishments, the education, and all the related issues to the daily life of the Palestinian prisoners in detention.
Thank you. One more follow-up question. Can you give us an example of torture? A lot of people are actually not aware of torture is against the law. So what kinds of torture, who is tortured, or any of these other violations?
Actually, any Palestinian that would be subjected for detention and could be subjected for different forms of torture. Torture can be very clear and physical pressure and abuse that is used, like the tying in very painful position under interrogation to the chair in a banana position, or shaking or sleep deprivation, or could be psychological torture, solitary confinement for hours and hours, and intimidation and interrogation under pressure, and ban on lawyer visit, and humiliation and using bad words. And as I said, in a Damir website, you can find also a very comprehensive description about the latest cases. Actually, we documented in 2019, in the summer of 2019, where the case of Samir Arbid, Walid Hanachi, and all the others. Samir Arbid case was a very significant case at that year because he was almost killed under interrogation within 48 hours from his detention. He was hospitalized with 11 broken ribs, with failure in the kidneys, and he reached a really very threatening life situation.
Is this somebody who is accused of murder?
In this case, yes, he's facing the accusation of being involved in the bombing that caused the killing of the Israeli person in 2019, as I said. But we should highlight that torture, according to the international law, is prohibited, and there's absolute prohibition on torture. There's no justification, neither emergency situation or war or anything that can justify the use of torture. Still, torture, no matter what the person did, the torture is prohibited according to the international law, and it's amounting to a war crime.
So one last follow-up question. So most of these people, are there children that have been tortured? And is most of these people who have been subjected to torture, is that a result of having been accused of a terrible crime?
At all, no. Of course, like the majority of the Palestinian detainees would be considered as activists, as students, as children, as political activists, as people that they are involved mostly in political activism and in resisting the occupation. At the end of the day, not everyone that is tortured, they can prove that he was involved in any militant activities. We documented horrible cases of torture. One of the cases that I can't give much details about it, but it was against a Palestinian female back in 2015, where the intimidation and the abuse against her, the sexual harassment she faced, was amounting to a rape. And still, the case was not investigated properly by the investigating body on the Israeli interrogation against the Israeli interrogators. And at the end of the day, the file was closed without any accusation against any of the involved people in this horrible experience. Strip search with very, very humiliating and intimidating search in her body.
Okay, thank you so much, Sahar. Ubai, can you tell us a little bit about who you are, why you got into this work, and describe the work of the Bisan Center?
Well, I come from an academic family. I was born in the States while my father was doing his PhD in linguistics. And I grew up dreaming of doing research work. I got into the field of economics. I got a bachelor's and a master's degree in economics. So I was doing a lot of work on social justice, on economics, on labor rights. In 2019, the Bisan Center was looking for a head, an executive director for the Center for Research and Development. And for myself, I saw it as an opportunity to go there, as Bisan is one of the leading Palestinian research organizations that have been active since 1989. And they have published a lot of the most critical and most important, I think, researches for the Palestinian society regarding what modes of development there are, what options, how Palestinians can build up the strength of our community, how we can have gender justice, social justice, how we can build an economy for all, not just an economy for the elite. And this kind of discourse and I would say mix in Bisan Center between doing critical research and doing the activism on the ground, working with youth, working with women's organizations. This is what got me interested. So in 2019, I started as the executive director of Bisan. Of course, when you're working in a organization that is critical of the occupation, critical of the practices of the PA, you are bound to also to be in trouble yourself and the organization. And we've been actually receiving attacks since even before 2019 as an organization. Whether it was from the private sector or from the PA or from even Israel. Wissam Center has faced problems with all of these factors in the Palestinian society.
Okay. Can you give us some specifics regarding some of the actual research that your center has done and the attacks that even prior to 2019?
Okay, so if I want to talk about a little bit about the research, the last two
Or,
research.
excuse me, or research or other work that you have done that you would
Yeah,
like
of
us to
course.
know about.
The last two researches we've done is one of them is called the shrinking space for women activists, where we applied the notion of shrinking space that's usually done on civil society, and we took it on the regards of Palestinian women, the violations they are facing from the occupation, from the PA, also from other duty bearers in the society, in Palestinian society, such as donor organizations, civil society, what are their roles, responsibilities, how they are failing, what should be done. So all of this actually we have been doing as part of our research. Another one is that land grabbing and peasants' rights in the West Bank, where we examine the notion of land grabbing according how it was defined by La Via Campesina, and the notions of peasants' rights in the United Nations declarations on peasants and rural communities and peasants' rights and peasants and people living in rural communities on DROP. We examine the roles of the Palestinian Authority also and the occupation, and even the donor-driven paradigm. Has it contributed to the driving people out of their land, or has it contributed to steadfastness of the people, of the farmers, Palestinian farmers on their land? Other researches that we have done over the years, we've done on civil society, industrial zones, which actually caused a lot of problems between us and the Palestinian Authority.
Can you tell us what industrial zones, what that means?
Well, there was a proposition for economic peace between Palestinians and Israeli that relied on a model that quite resembled the industrial zones that are between the United States and Mexico. And you know where international corporations go, have the factories, and this like on the borders where just workers come and they don't have the rights from developing countries and face huge amounts of persecutions and violations, and then they go back to their homes at the end of the day without having any rights, and their permits to go and work can be revoked at any moment. So this was actually something that Wissam Center as an organization stood against. And actually we did a lot of comparison on what happened between the US-Mexico border and this example, and the horrific actually human rights violations that happened there. Also, but this was actually also going against people that were interested in having these special interest groups that wanted these kinds of investments, this flow of money into their pockets, on the expense of the rights and dignities of Palestinian daily wage workers, I would say. Other programs that we have, we work, a main pillar of our work is gender justice. Actually, Wissam Center was the first center to do in 1989 a women's rights conference in the West Bank. And also we actually did the research that started the NGO forum, the Palestinian NGO Forum for Combating Violence Against Women, that was done in the year 2000. Now it's one of the most active coalitions demanding women's rights in Palestine. We are also founding members of Palestinian non-governmental organizations network PINGO, and work also on with the coalition for combating corruption in the Palestinian Authority, which is a chapter of TI International.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much. You both organizations are obviously doing very important work. This next section is going to be about the Israeli government's designation of your organizations and the other 4 organizations as terrorist groups. And I say Israeli government, not Israel, because so many Israelis disagree with this designation. In particular, there is the statement made by 25 Israeli NGOs that refer to you as colleagues and who demand that their government revoke these designations. They call you trusted and respected organizations that they depend on in order to do their work. One of the questions that I have of you, and you can answer one at a time, you can have a conversation as you wish, is how have you or would you like to reply to the Israeli government about this charge? And if you'd like to explain a little bit about the process of this charge and what's happened so far, what's next, feel free to do that. Either one of you can start.
If I may, first, it should be clear that it's not a charge, because it says a lot about the procedure that was taken against us. And before this decision was taken by the Israeli security minister in October, that there was a long campaign of harassment and attacks against the Palestinian organizations, not just the 6, but the civil society, the Palestinian civil society. There is groups associated with the Israeli government, especially in the last 10 years, 15 years. And actually it's intensifying since the 2004 decision of the International Court of Justice on the Wall case and the initiative of the boycott, divestment, and sanctions campaign that was founded by the Palestinian civil society. Then we are facing the campaign led by the NGO Monitor, UK Lawyers for Israel, Im Tirtzu, Regavim, Shurat Adin. There's tens of Israeli right-wing organizations that they were inciting against the Palestinian civil society and intimidating, and it's all in order to silence us and to affect our work, to dry our resources. And you should remember that at some point, the previous Israeli government founded the Strategic Affairs Ministry in order to face all these efforts by the Palestinian civil society, especially in the international level. Beside the boycott, divestment, sanctions campaign, as well the work that we are doing toward the International Criminal Court. And it seems that they failed in this campaign to affect especially the donors and the main countries that they were supporting the civil society, and in the international level, in the UN level, or in the community of the human rights organizations and rights organizations all over, and grassroots in other contexts. So what happened in the 2021, actually, that the Israelis claim that they now have more evidences to present, and this is why they drafted the famous secret dossier that they presented to the European countries back in May. And it seems it wasn't convincing for the Europeans to claim that we are terrorist organizations and they should stop the contacts with us. And this is why the last chance for them is using this anti-terror law of 2016 that was developed inside the state of Israel. And it's a violation for the international law that they are trying to implement it on the occupied territories. So the whole decision based on the 2016 law actually is not proper under the international law, but the minister did it. And of course, Israel is always doing whatever they want, irrelevant and irrespective to the, they don't respect their obligations under international human rights law or international humanitarian law. And after this decision of the minister, the military governor in the occupied territories also declared us as illegal entities. So we are facing now both procedures, one under the Israeli civil laws and one under the Israeli military orders and military justice system. Of course, these accusations or these suspicions are not true. It's not supported by any information that could stand in any proper due process procedure in any democratic legal system in the world. And this is why it's difficult for them. I mean, on the international level, so far, we saw how the position of most of the states, even if they didn't took a very clear position, but at least the fact that they so far, they couldn't approve or support the Israeli decision, this is just shows that their legal arguments against us are so weak. And this is why they are using these efforts in order to silence us, because they cannot bring a clear accusation against us that they can prove, and they believe that it can stand even in front of their courts. And there is a case, a court case against another, a seventh organization, the healthcare committees, that some of their employees, including the director, Ms. Shada Audi, that was arrested back in July, and some of the other employees in March, April, and May, they are still awaiting trial in the military court, and it's not none of them so far, beside just one employee, she's a Spanish citizen as well, they were not convicted in this case.
Thank you. Can you tell us where this current designation stands in terms of the process at this time? I thought today was a special date in terms of your appeal. Could you explain that?
Yes. So in short, according to the military orders, we were supposed to appeal to the military governor against his decision to illegalize the organizations. What we did, we requested the military governor to receive the information that was the base for his decision. And last week, we were informed that we can copy the information. And actually, he amended the deadline to submit our appeal till today, actually, the 18th of January. And he enabled us to copy the material. So we did receive part of the material, the public material. And after we reviewed it, we discovered there's no evidences. It's not sufficient. It's not, there is nothing in the material that really can prove the allegations or the arguments against us. And this is why we communicated, I mean, the legal team that represents the six organization contacted the legal military governor office last Sunday, and we requested and insisting to get the secret information, because you should know that the whole case here is built on a secret file that they don't want to disclose to us. So can you imagine how we are going to defend ourselves without being aware, without knowing what's really the facts that can prove that we are terrorist organizations? And we requested again to get the material, and we requested another amendment for 1 month. We didn't receive any reply so far till now. And in the same time, in the civil system, like according to the Israeli anti-terror law, we were supposed also to appeal to a special committee that advise the minister, and they will review also the same. We believe that it's the same secret information. So we told them, how come you can use two different systems against us in the same time? We are subjected to the military control, so let's go with the military orders and the military procedures first, and to exhaust this channel, can you delay the procedures a bit? And we got till the 1st of February to be checking what will happen in the military level. So far, I think we would also request more time from the minister. There is no final decision about the appeal because of the main problem of the use of secret information. As I said, this is affecting seriously the due process against us. And this is why I doubt that even if we appeal or exhaust all the remedies according to the Israeli system, it should be very clear that we will not succeed, because this system was designed, especially in these cases, anti-terror, security, and all these, exactly like the administrative detention cases against Palestinian detainees, that is mostly based on secret information in order not to enable the person or the entity or the organization to defend themselves properly.
Thank you so much. It's very clear. Ubai, did you want to add to that, or should we move on?
Yes, of course. Of course, this is a political decision. This is not a legal decision. This is not a security decision. Today, I just noticed that the head of an Israeli human rights organization, or one of the workers there, published a secret dossier by the Israeli Ministry of Intelligence under the title "The Palestinian Battle for Area C, Creating a Security Situation on the Ground, Description and Significance." This is an official report that was done in July. One of its main recommendations, which is recommendation number 77, it talks about, and this is quoting it, incriminating the individuals and organizations who enjoy foreign funding, tarnishing their reputation, and exposing their connections to terrorist elements. This is the Israeli government recommendations against Palestinians in Area C. Most of our organizations have a lot of work there, whether it was Al-Haq, like in documenting, Damir, that represents Palestinians that were imprisoned from Area C and taken to Israeli jails, or Awak doing work with farmers and reclaiming agricultural lands to help the subsistence of farmers, or Bisan doing also research on the natural resources and steadfastness of people in Area C. So this kind of targeting, I think that it's just shows the kind of mentality behind it. And when there's an official Israeli document talking from the Ministry of Intelligence about tarnishing the reputation of organizations that receive foreign funding, and this was back in July, and then we have steps on the ground, this tells a lot about why the Palestinian civil society is being tarnished. We are very clear that we, as civil society organizations, we defend the rights of the Palestinians that are living under military occupation, under an apartheid system, under a system that dehumanizes us each and every day, a system that treats us as second-class people. One of the things that might be noticeable, Palestinian activists and human rights organizations, we were hacked and violated by Pegasus. It didn't even cause an outcry in Israel, although some of the people that were hacked had the Jerusalemite ID, which is quote unquote some of the more rights than Palestinians that are living in the West Bank. But today there's a big outcry in Israel because this same NSO software, the Pegasus software, was used against the Jewish Israelis. And there, because it was used against them, there's an investigation now by the Israeli monitor of the state or general observer. I don't know what they call him exactly, official investigation. But when it was used against Palestinians, it didn't even get an outcry, it didn't even get a mention in the Israeli news media. So this tells a lot about why Palestinian civil society is being targeted, why Palestinians in general are being targeted by this kind of practices by the occupation.
Thank you. And what you said, Sahar, has, of course, was confirmed by investigators from the EU who received that information in this secret dossier, who went to Ramallah to thoroughly investigate the accusations and reported that there was absolutely no credible evidence of any sign of any terrorist activities within any of the 6 groups. Too bad there isn't a Palestinian court that you can't bring charges against the crimes that are committed against you, can't bring those charges against those people. Okay, thank you very much. Next questions, and I'll ask these 2 together actually. What impact has this designation already had on just the designation on you personally, your staff, the work of Damir in the Bisan Center, and if you choose the other 4 organizations, and you can either answer this at the same time or next, what additional impact there might be if you were found guilty. Who would like to address?
Ubai this time. Go ahead.
Okay, look, the impact is very significant from the first day. When actually how we heard about it is also really also a story by itself. We weren't actually even officially informed of the designations, all of us. We were informed of the designations through the media. I had journalists contacting me on Friday after receiving emails from the Israeli Ministry of Justice, I think, that there were 6 Palestinian organizations that were declared as terrorist organizations. And people were sending me on WhatsApp the declarations and what do you think? And I told them,
Oops. Ubai, we're going to need you to repeat because you're frozen right now.
I have to contact the lawyers. I actually even connection problem. Hopefully it
Yeah, we just hold on a second. You are still frozen. Yes. You're still frozen.
Is this better?
I can hear you. Your face isn't moving
Is this
yet.
better?
Yes, this is better. Thank you. Right. There you are.
Okay. So I contacted Sahar. I told her, have you seen this? And she talked to
Oh, you're gone
told
again.
me, okay, let's check this out also.
Hey, Ubai, why don't
on
you
a
shut
second-
off your Ubai, why don't you shut off your video and just leave the audio for now?
Okay, is this better?
Yes, so far.
Okay, so this was on the first level, how we heard about it. And then when we started contacting lawyers and starting contacting organizations, we started to understand the meaning of this designation and its impact on us. Actually, the first night I remember that we couldn't even go to sleep because we were thinking that the Israeli army would break into the door at any moment and come to arrest us. What we were surprised also at was the fast international outcry against the designation. And I think this is something that gave a lot of protection for the organizations, that this international shock and outcry by a large number of people, organizations, the statement that was issued by Human Rights Watch and Amnesty from the first hours, I think it was an amazing move also back then. When thinking back about it, they didn't take time to react. People in the offices, the staff were asking me, what does this mean? how does this impact us? What should we do? And actually, this kind of feeling that the sky is falling, if I want to describe it like that. One day you're working on human rights issues, doing research, doing advocacy work. The next day you're designated as a terrorist and you're seeing the sentences. It's quite crazy. For one aspect, you feel, oh, they are designating me like Osama bin Laden, or and they designated Bisan like ISIS, organizations that works on human rights issues. And the impact on the organizations is, until today, we are living in the, even if you have a second citizenship, like myself having US citizenship, it doesn't guarantee you any special treatment also. Just because you are Palestinians, this means that you are open for all kinds of violations. There's no accountability. And this is the reality of living under Israeli military occupation. For the organizations, the staff were amazing. The staff, of course, they were afraid, but we have committed staff, not just in Bisan, all of the organizations. They thought it is a huge violation of human rights, and this is something that we, as Palestinians, should stand up against. For the organizations themselves, yes, we are having to deal with crisis on a daily basis right now, and I think this was part of the plan of, instead of us focusing on the work that we are doing, now so much of our resources are dedicated to fighting this designation, of working against it, doing advocacy work against it, instead of doing we still do our work, but there's a considerable part of the resources also shifted there. For us also, this is, I think, the irrationality of the occupation, of the injustice, the severity of it, where people cannot understand. I think this is also has been a learning lesson for everyone, that we cannot just live on or adapt to a situation where human rights violations and systematic dehumanization of an entire population is taken for granted, and something that can be said, okay, so this is there's no big crisis right now, so people can go on in their daily lives. This is the idea. We cannot go on in our daily lives with these designations.
If I may add, that we think not all of the measures and like the options were used so far, because none of the actually the offices were not raided after the designation, which we expected, as Ubai said, not yet. They didn't confiscated or controlled our property, equipments, like in the case of OAC, the Agriculture Work Union Committees. They can confiscate all of their equipments and property. They can freeze our bank accounts. They can arrest board members, the employees, and everyone. So far, we are waiting for all these to be implemented or not. But I agree with Ubai, maybe the international support was so significant, so they are waiting to see how all this will develop. But I mean, it's very important to keep in mind that it's not the first time that Israel is attacking civil society. And our offices were raided several times. And like in the Damir case, it's the last time they raided the office was in 2019, and they stole 6 computers, and before in 2012, and other organizations were raided as well in other areas. But in the 90s, in East Jerusalem, Israel managed to shut down more than 40 Palestinian NGOs, including the Orient House that used to be the main office for the PLO at that time in the city, because Israel actually is managing to go away with all the violations that they commit. So this is why they usually do a test case, look and see what's the reactions to come, and then strategize more and continue more in their policies. So it should be highlighted, this is the first time they use the anti-terror law of 2016 against Palestinian organizations in the West Bank. And this is a kind of illegal annexation. If we think about it, how Israel allow itself to use an Israeli civil law in the occupied territories, violating the international law, but this is kind of legal annexation that we were alerting against for so long. And of course, the issue of the land and the annexation of the physical land and all the political context related to this case of the sixth organization. And I'm sure it will not stop with the sixth organization because of the kind of strategies that Ubai described before. Several articles or opinions that would be published by Israeli officials. You can learn about this strategy that they are not happy with the Palestinian civil society role, especially in switching the discourse in the international level toward more apartheid, war crimes, crimes against humanity, accountability, all these language and terms that now the international community is more open to listen to and to act. This is worries them, and this is why we should be silenced, and this is why they want us to stop being able to continue our work. And this is why it will affect, and it's affecting us, but it will be done slowly in order to see how they can also evaluate their steps and not do everything. And of course, DCI office was attacked just in July, and Bisan office as well. And this came after the raids and the closure of the Health Work Committee's office and the Agriculture Union of Work Committees.
Very informative. Thank you so much. The next question I'll ask also together. You've talked about the impact this has had so far, just a designation. If you are in fact found guilty of this, how might that impact you and your organizations? And also, how is the impact of the designation, and if you were found guilty, impact the lives of Palestinian people living in the occupied territories? And that's sort of my last questions before we move into the Q&A. Thanks.
So, as I said, it will be a test case. I'm not sure if they will end up arresting more employees from these organizations. Like, for example, ourselves, me and Ubai as directors to the organizations, according to the textbook, we could face 25 years imprisonment by being responsible of leading a terrorist group and terrorist organization. I'm not sure that if they will do it or not, but this is theoretically, they can do it and they can implement it whenever. I think and I feel more that they want to dry our resources and they want to silence us. So what they will push for now in the coming maybe few weeks or few months is more to affect the decisions of the donating countries, the international organizations, the partners, the associations that works with us to stop fund us and to dry our resources. The banking system would be affected definitely because all bank, like the interest of any bank will push them to be hesitant to continue working with these
Would you like
six
to ask-
organizations.
Would you like to ask them?
And of course, this is, if it succeeds, if the decision is not revoked, if the international community, especially the European countries and the United States, and here I'm highlighting the position of the United States, because I think much will, especially the banking system, would be waiting and looking for the decision of the United States on this issue. And if this case would pass, would be confirmed, like the decision would continue to be that we are terrorist organization, this would mean a very, very serious effect on the whole Palestinian civil society, because this will make it very easy for the Israelis to declare about any organization. So far, it was very easy for Israel to declare about any political party, any student movement, any union, any charitable organization, any even sport clubs were declared as terrorist organizations, because Israel was always claiming that they are affiliated with this or that political party. So now, if they manage to do it for human rights organizations, development organizations, research organizations, no one in the Palestinian civil society could be protected anymore. Anyone could be accused and being declared as a terrorist side, and that's it, and it will work. And this is what they are looking for, and this is why it's very important to cancel this decision and revoke it.
Thank you. Ubai, would you like to say something before we move into the Q&A and address some of the questions from people who have been listening?
Well, about the stance of the US, we just said farewell to a big humanitarian, Desmond Tutu. And Desmond said, if you choose neutrality in a situation of justice, then you are siding with the oppressor. And the US, unfortunately, although all of the rhetoric we heard from the Biden administration about human rights being an integral part of its foreign policy, but we do not see that being implemented in this situation. What we are saying right now is that the US has remained mostly silent, the US administration, and I think this is contrary to all the values
Ubai, you're frozen.
that important for people. Yeah,
Ubai, maybe you should check your connection.
try to stop the video. Well, I'm doing my best with the
Oh,
connection. Maybe this way better. And انت شابك عن البيت.
we hear you now.
Oh yes, okay. So maybe also, if I wanted to say about that, I think that the international community is now in a critical moment. Either countries act up, or we will see a wave, a global wave also of targeting of civil society organizations and being declared as terrorist organizations. We saw how the US administration reprimanded Russia for closing of the Memorial Organization, one of the oldest human rights organizations in Russia. And when it comes to Israel and practicing declaring 6 organizations as terrorist organizations, the US is unfortunately silent.
Thank you. Important dire warnings for all of us on this call and all of us who care about justice on this planet. At this time, I'm going to move the mic over to my colleague, Noble Larson, who has been paying attention to all the questions coming in the chat. And for the next 10 minutes, about 10 or 15 minutes max, He's going to be giving you some of those questions, asking you some of those questions. Thanks, Noble.
Okay, let me,
No?
you should mute
I
and
tried to, but
turn off your,
I tried to. Unmuted.
I have to. Okay, we'll try that.
Ed, you got to turn off your speaker.
Yeah, turn off your.
Turn your volume down to 0. So no sound comes out of your computer.
Okay, is that better?
Yes, it is.
Okay, great. I'm going to combine 2 questions here, ask them together. Susan Nicholson has asked whether Adamir, this would go to Sahar, whether Adamir documents violations of prisoner rights by the Palestinian Authority. And Robin Allman asks whether Adamir also covers the torture of children, or is that done only by DCIP?
Shall I take it?
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's to you, Sahar.
Yes, so yes, so Damir is following as well political prisoners cases under the Palestinian Authority. So we do represent them in the Palestinian courts, and we do document torture and other violations that the prisoners face. But unfortunately, under the Palestinian Authority, Damir as an organization, we have difficulties to access detention facilities. So the lawyers have to visit on their own capacity, not as representing the organization. And in most of the cases, we do the documentation after the release of the detainees. One of the cases we followed under the Palestinian Authority in the last couple of months in 2 occasions was the case of Ubai, when he was arrested by the Palestinian security forces, unfortunately after the killing of the political activists Nizar Banat. And we do document and visit and represent Palestinian children under the Israeli occupation with sometimes jointly with DCI. We do follow, especially on the international level, advocacy on behalf of child detainees on the international level. Allow me just to highlight a very unique special case that Damir now is following for a teenager that he just became 18 yesterday. Amal Nakhli, he's an administrative detainee. Imagine a boy that he was arrested when he was 17, was sent for 1 year under administrative detention. Of course, it was 4 months, and then it was renewed based on secret information, and he suffers from a very serious illness, myasthenia gravis, which makes his situation very difficult in prison. And you can find more on his case in our website. They just extended his detention for another 4 months last week, actually.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Sahar. Will Thomas has asked 2 questions. One of them you've maybe kind of answered, but I'll put it anyway. Actually, this can go to both of you. Has this designation led to fewer donations and support? And I'll ask the second question while I'm at it. And how much, if at all, has Adamir been in contact with officials at the ICC and submitted examples of severe torture and crimes against humanity?
Well, I think the designation has backfired against the Israelis. We have seen much more international solidarity with the 6 organizations in terms of people coming out and willing to donate, willing to express solidarity, willing to take action. Of course, There are those that are afraid of the Israeli designations, and this is natural, this happens. But the overwhelming majority has been of statements and actions of solidarity. And actually, I think that in this regard, if the thinking of Gantz, the war criminal Gantz, was to dry up the funds of the Palestinian civil society organizations, I think this has backfired in that direction.
Sahar, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, but I think it should be highlighted the unfortunate decision, the latest decision of the Dutch government in the case of the agriculture work union, that they suspended the fund, although their investigation, and they admit and confirm that the investigation led for no connections, and it confirmed that there's no money mismanagement or any official connections between the organization and any political party, not the PFLP, of course. On the case of Damir and the work with the ICC, Damir actually were in contact with the office of the prosecutor in the ICC in the early years after the Palestinian Authority decided to join and signed in 2014, in 2015 actually, and after we had meetings and we submitted joint reports with DCI for the court about the case of the Palestinian prisoners, on the torture, on the transfer, on the arbitrary detention, and on the other violations that can be under the jurisdiction of the court, like the fair trial procedures and not offering fair trial procedures. And we did submitted other cases. Part of it we requested to keep it not published, I would say, but in the last allegations, we introduced several cases of child detainees that they were transferred to the Israeli prisons inside Israel as a war crime, because transfer is not allowed. And we will continue the work with the prosecutor office.
Sahar, you mentioned the Dutch case of the Dutch cutting funds. Curtis Bell asked whether you anticipate that other EU countries might follow that example of cutting funds to that group, or maybe any of the other 6 organizations.
Actually, the EU, some of the colleagues, they get fund from the EU itself, like not from a specific country, but the EU suspended the fund for Al-Haq even before the designation itself, after they got this secret dossier. And it's not clear on which basis they decided to do so, because in the same time they rejected this dossier and the information, and they said it's not sufficient. So we know that on the EU specifically, there is a conflict in between 2 positions. The political side in the EU is very supportive, and they visited and they showed support to the organizations, and they said so far that they don't agree with the Israeli decision, and they demanded that the Israeli state should submit more information and more proof if they have for such serious allegations. But unfortunately, on the other hand, on the practical level, on the contracts and programs and projects level, there is some hesitation that we think it's it should be stopped, and the EU should take also a very clear position saying that that's it, there's no more waiting for such information. What you have, you submitted, and it seems it's not sufficient, and that's it, and to take a decision. But also in this opportunity, it should be highlighted that other countries already decided that they want to continue fund and supporting, like in the case of Al-Haq, if I'm not mistaken, it's Denmark, that they decided that they are not taking the Israeli arguments, and the information that was presented is not sufficient, and they decided to continue with their projects with Al-Haq. And they said it clearly.
This is a really just a request. Jill Charney has asked if Ubai might share information on the efforts to tarnish the reputations of the organizations. That it would probably be useful information.
Yeah, okay. So
you could just put a document in the chat.
it's not a document, it's actually a Twitter thread by Yehuda Shaul. So you can just click the link and follow this thread. It says a lot actually, and I just got notice of it today. But this is part of the main Israeli discourse, has been for years also. This is to talk about, but this is the importance is that he's revealing a document by the Israeli Ministry of Intelligence, which is the equivalent to Homeland Security in the United States, or national security, not Homeland Security.
Okay. Do we have any more time?
No.
We don't. Okay, I guess that's it.
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
I'm going to unmute.
Hold on, let me-
Thank you, everybody, for your questions. And if there are more questions that we haven't had a chance to ask the speakers, if you drop them into the chat, we will send those to the speakers. I don't know if the speakers will have a chance to get back to you or not, but at least they'll know what questions that you have asked if we've missed some of those. I have, before we go in, as part of going into our next section, I have a question for Ubai and Sahar. What is your perception of the U.S. role in what the Israeli government is doing?
Well, I already talked about that, but I think it's...
You need to unmute Ubai.
Oh, is this better? I already talked about that. It's, I think, a situation of complicity.
Ubai, we can't hear you.
I can hear him fine, Pat. I think you need
maybe
to
the
turn up
problem
your
is
volume.
only in your part. مسموع صح ولا؟ Okay. So Pat, I think this is a situation of complicity because they are remaining silent, remaining neutral in the face of this grave violation. The U.S. administration, according to our understanding, has not taken any action to endorse the Israeli designation, but nor does it did it take any designation to ask them to withdraw it or put pressure on them to withdraw it. From what we heard from different governments that received different parts of the so-called secret material, there's nothing to indict the organizations. We are civil society organizations working in public. Our work is done in the daylight. And when we actually accuse the occupation, for example, as Bisan is accusing the occupation of doing de-development for Palestinians, which is holding us and confiscating our resources and depriving us from the right to development as even human beings, as communities. This is something we follow with a lot of evidence. When Damir says that Israel commits tortures, they give a lot of hard evidence in the broad daylight. But when the Israeli government comes to accuse us, they say, oh, we have secret evidence. And whenever the secret evidence leaks, as the documents that were done by the investigative reports by the Intercept and Plus 972, it's revealed that their evidence is nonsense. So what we are asking the US administration is to stand up for human rights. We are asking people to put more pressure on the US administration in order to take action and not remain neutral on this issue.
Okay, which is a good segue into my next question is, how can we hear, presumably most of us here are on this call or in the United States, with the predominance of us in Massachusetts, but there may be people from elsewhere. How can we help you? What would you like us to do to help you? And that's to both of you, or either of you.
So I think more and more and more raising awareness around this case. This would be also an opportunity to raise awareness about all the violations and all the other issues in the occupied territories. Because of our work, it's connected and related to so many issues like prisoners, land, children, women, development, human rights in general. So I think it's very, very important to keep the voice loud against this designation. And of course, to pressure the decision-making level in the United States that they should take a stand in support of human rights, and they should say no to the Israelis very clearly, and they should ask them to revoke their decision.
Fair enough. Ubai, would you like to add to that?
Sorry, I wanted to share the link for the Palestinian civil society, which has clear links to action, but unfortunately now it's updating, so it's quite not the best time to share it. But you can do the following action if you're based in the United States. First of all, contact your congressman or senator and tell them to take action by writing the Israeli embassy or the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs and asking them to revoke the designation. And this attack on civil society is an attack on democratic values and human rights. You can also send letters to Secretary Blinken asking him to take action and stand up to the program that he said that he's coming with the State Department in of respect for human rights as an integral part of the United States foreign policy. You can go to the websites of the organizations such as Bisan or Damir, and you can find ways to volunteer, make donations for the organizations. If you are part of an organization that works in any field, the six are so diverse, you can find a way to partner, maybe on a webinar, maybe on a joint research, maybe on a solidarity trip, maybe on a political education program about the situation in Palestine and human rights issues. And this, of course, with the six organizations, this will be the most helpful. The designation in itself is talking about the criminalization of Palestinian civil society, which means the isolation, the cutoff of funding, the cutoff of relations. So more relations, more impact, more contacts. This is the way that we beat this.
Okay, thank you very much. To ask, you mentioned we can donate to you. Are there ways? I've been in touch with two different groups last night and this morning of people who would like to donate perhaps at least a little bit to every organization. And we, on that call, aren't sure. I know that our church actually donated to Adamir a couple of years ago. It was very difficult to do that. Is there a way for us, can you maybe drop in the chat or let us know after this call, if it's hard to let us know right now, how we can donate financially to every organization, and we will get that information to everybody in the follow-up letter to this webinar.
I would suggest if we can do it later on, not online, it's a bit more complicated, and maybe it will be also different from one organization to another, because it's related to the different banks that we are connected to, and the ability of each organization to get donations, individual donations from abroad, and if it's in dollars or in other currencies. So
how is the
I
best
think-
way, right, for us to find, did people contact you directly, write to you at Adamir to find out how to do that? We would like to be able to actually assist people, or maybe we can pursue that offline, and how people can like to give to individual groups or all six.
it would be easier if there's a group that can do it collectively, like a
Palestine
initiative.
NGO.
Yeah, because
We'll follow up
individually
with that.
it would be costly as well for each one that would
Right.
do his own transfer, I think.
Okay, we will
Well-
try to follow up with that. We're getting close to a lot that we need to do to wrap up here. The next, you asked us to contact President Biden and Secretary Blinken and our members of Congress. So there so far have been many letters and petitions, and they have, rather than continuing, than stopping, they have been continuing. Those of us in the state of Massachusetts have decided to come together to create a petition to President Biden and Secretary Blinken, where we ask them to publicly condemn this and apply pressure on the Israeli government to revoke this designation. And so far, many individuals have signed on to this, and a number of organizations have signed on to this. And we are inviting many other Palestinian rights organizations to sign on, and in particular, mainstream organizations who are very upset about these outrageous attack on civil rights to sign on. So we are inviting, in particular, organizations who may not know a lot about the Palestinian situation, but know that this is absolutely wrong. No government should do this. So we have this petition, and that has been dropped into this into the chat, and we will send that information in our letter afterwards. We also encourage people, we will send phone numbers for people to call the members of Congress, to call the White House, to send emails to the White House. This has been happening, but we need to make sure that it continues to happen. Polls indicate that among voters in the United States, increasingly more and more people understand the situation in Palestine that we are supporting as a government. Leaders of both parties are supporting this. And but the younger people, people want to get reelected. They need to be listening to the younger generation, and those of us who are the older generation, who are in increasing numbers, understand what's happening, and that it's imperative that we contact our members of Congress and the State Department and our president. Both Sahar and Ubai, we thank you very much for attending. I believe that you both have closing statements for us, and then I will wrap up with some final thank yous. So who would like to go first? Ubai, would you like to give your closing statement first?
Okay, so I would first like to thank everyone that has stood up in this difficult times, stood up for justice, stood up for dignity, stood up for basic human rights. I think that I would say real values show when there's a price to pay, and it's a time when people are standing up and in the face of such terrible accusations of terrorism, and when they are standing up in solidarity with the organizations. Some of them are taking personal risks, even saying that this shall not pass. This is something we will not agree upon. And this shows, I think, the best in the human nature. Us as human beings, we face so many challenges on our daily lives, on our personal lives, but it's always very important to think about those that are less fortunate, those that are facing systematic injustices, those that are still waiting for the international community to deliver on its words of freedom and dignity for the Palestinian people. For my part, I would say the targeting of Palestinian civil society is not unique in terms of targeting of human rights defenders, and it's not unique also in terms of targeting of the Palestinian people in general. Our people have been going through a systematic ethnic cleansing since 1948, and part of that is the trying to crush our narrative, which the Palestinian, I think, civil society has been defending real vigorously for the past 40 plus years, whether it was Al-Haq or Damir or any of the organizations. I call on everyone to take collective action as much as possible. Find a local Palestine solidarity group, a local Palestine action group, a local group that's interested in fighting injustice or contributing to it, and please be part of it. Try to take action, and try also, I think the least thing that anyone can do, share on a Twitter or on your Facebook page or on your social media something about Palestine, about the civil society organizations, about the injustices that are happening today. And hopefully, if enough people come together around the ideas of freedom and justice, we can have a better future for everyone in the coming years.
Inshallah. Sahar.
Yeah, thank you so much for this great opportunity. It was really an honor and very important for me personally and for our cause as 6 organizations and for the Palestinian cause. And I believe solidarity would mean as well thinking strategically together. For me, the case of the designation of the 6 Palestinian organizations is a continuity for what happened in the United States after September 11th. And I think the whole efforts of the Israeli state now is manipulation of the anti-terror laws and concepts and theories and strategies that were developed, unfortunately, after September 11th in the United States with the support of the State of Israel. If you think about all the things that happened in this discourse of the war against terror, you would find that the United States and Israel were always joining efforts, especially on the intelligence and the security and the surveillance and all these measures. This is why it is very important that we, the people, join the efforts in order to face and defeat all these oppressive tools that are used against our communities, whether in the United States or here in the occupied territories. So thank you so much for this evening, and hopefully that we will continue the struggle for the future.
Thank you, Sahar and Ubai. You are both an incredible inspiration. We are trying to hold this democracy together. For us, for our government to ignore this blatant act of extreme obstruction of basic human rights that are the foundation of any democracy. By this country that is our close friend, with shared values, and the recipient of more foreign aid than any other country, for our government to ignore this would mean that both main political parties do not care about the pursuit of truth, justice, or basic democratic principles. That is unacceptable, and we will not let this go. I thank everyone here for attending and listening to these courageous and dedicated people. I'm sending a special thank you to two courageous members of the Massachusetts delegation to Washington, D.C., Representative Ayanna Pressley for signing on to Representative McCollum's resolution 751 that condemns this designation, and to Representative Jim McGovern for writing a passionate letter to Secretary Blinken, asking him to firmly and unambiguously denounce these actions and to urge the Israeli government to reverse this decision. I also thank Noble Larson, who put many hours into helping with this webinar and has been working behind the scenes here, dropping links into the chat and answering questions. Also Susan Nicholson, Eva Mosley, Claire Sheridan, and Abby Yano, and Jeff Klein, all of the MAPA, Palestine-Israel Working Group, the MAPA Racial Justice Decolonization Group, Jill Charney and our friends at JVP, Nancy Murray and our friends of the Boston Water Alliance, Diana Dix and Susan Nye of UUJME, members of HRIPI, CD3, many, many others, and especially MAPA's indefatigable and intrepid leader, Cole Harrison. In warm and most grateful solidarity, seeking what is truthful and working for healthier communities, country, and planet, we're wishing you all well wherever you are. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night.